It was a normal night. A young man called his parents to say he was fine, and then, mid-sentence, the call went silent. No scream, no crash, no goodbye. Just silence. That was the last anyone ever heard from Brandon Swanson. And to this day, no one knows what happened to him. This is not a story about a cold case from decades ago. This happened in 2008 in rural Minnesota, in the heart of America. A 19-year-old boy vanished into thin air, and despite one of the longest searches in Minnesota history, he was never found. Not his body, not his car, not a single trace. So tonight, we are going to walk through every detail, every phone call, every clue, every theory, because someone out there knows something, and because Brandon Swanson deserves to be remembered. Let's go back to the beginning. May 14th, 2008. It's a Wednesday night, just weeks before summer. Brandon is 19 years old, living in Marshall, Minnesota, a small town in the southwestern part of the state. He's a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He's studying electrical technology at a nearby college. He's got friends. He's got plans. He's got that kind of easy confidence that comes from growing up in a tight-knit community where everybody knows your name. That night, Brandon had been out with friends near Lind, Minnesota, a tiny town just a few miles from Marshall. He'd been at a party. Nothing wild, nothing out of the ordinary, just a regular spring night for a 19-year-old in small-town America. But on the way home, something went wrong. Brandon's car ended up in a ditch, not on the road he was supposed to be on, but in a field near a gravel road outside of Lind. His car wasn't badly damaged, he wasn't injured, he just got stuck. So Brandon did what any sensible kid would do. He called his parents. At around midnight, he called his dad, Brian Swanson, and said he needed help. He told his dad his car was in a ditch and asked him to come pick him up. Brian agreed immediately. Of course he did. That's what fathers do. Now here is where things start to get strange. Brandon told his dad he was near Lind, but when Brian and Annette drove to Lind, they couldn't find him. They drove around, they called out, they looked everywhere they could think of. Nothing. So Brandon and his father stayed on the phone. For over an hour, they talked as Brian drove around the area, trying to pinpoint exactly where Brandon was. Brandon said he could see lights in the distance. He said he was walking toward what he thought was the town of Lind. He seemed calm, a little frustrated maybe, but calm. And then, right in the middle of the conversation, Brandon said, "Oh shit," and the line went dead. Brian called back immediately. No answer. He called again and again. Voicemail. He and Annette kept driving, kept searching, kept calling. Nothing. By 2 in the morning, they called the police. Now let's pause here for a second, because that phrase deserves to sink in. Oh shit. 2 words, that was it. No explanation, no sound of impact, no scream, no splash, no tires screeching. Just 2 words, and then silence. What did Brandon see? What did he walk into? What startled him so suddenly that those were his last words? Nobody knows. The police responded quickly, and within hours, a search was underway. But here's the first major problem that investigators ran into immediately. Brandon had told his father he was near Lind, but when they found his car the next morning, it wasn't near Lind at all. His car was found near a place called Taunton, Minnesota, roughly 25 miles away from where he said he was. 25 miles. That means either Brandon was completely disoriented about where he was, or something else was going on. Now, some people have suggested he may have been drunk that night. Brandon's family has pushed back on that firmly, but investigators did note that he may have consumed alcohol at the party. Whatever the case, Brandon believed he was near Lind. He was describing lights and landmarks as if he were near Lind, but his car was miles away from there. This geographic confusion would haunt the investigation for years. Once his car was located near Taunton, the search shifted to that area, and what followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations in Minnesota history. We're talking over 100 volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, dive teams checking ponds and waterways, law enforcement from multiple counties. The search went on for days, and then weeks, and then it never really stopped. They searched fields, they searched ditches, they searched the banks of the Yellow Medicine River, which runs through that area. They searched farmland for miles in every direction. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a jacket, not a phone, not a body. Brandon Swanson had simply ceased to exist. His parents, Brian and Annette, refused to give up. And I want to take a moment here to talk about them, because their story is not just heartbreaking, it is inspiring in the most devastating way possible. Brian and Annette Swanson did not sit at home and grieve quietly. They became advocates. They became fighters. They took the grief that would have destroyed most people, and they channeled it into something powerful. You see, before Brandon disappeared, Minnesota had a law that prevented law enforcement from immediately searching for missing adults. If you were over 18 and you went missing, police had to wait before launching a full investigation. The assumption was that adults have the right to leave on their own, that they might just be taking some time away, which sounds reasonable in theory, but in practice, it meant that in the hours right after someone vanished, when the trail was freshest and the chances of finding them were highest, law enforcement had their hands tied. Brandon's parents changed that. They went to the Minnesota State Legislature. They testified. They advocated. They pushed and pushed and pushed. And in 2009, just 1 year after Brandon disappeared, Minnesota passed what is now known as Brandon's Law. It requires law enforcement to immediately begin investigating missing persons cases regardless of age. No waiting period, no assumption that the person just left voluntarily. Because of Brandon Swanson, other families in Minnesota have had a better chance at finding their missing loved ones. His disappearance created change, real, tangible, life-saving change. But it still didn't bring him home. Now, let's talk about the theories, because there are several, and each one is haunting in its own way. The most widely accepted theory, and the one that investigators lean toward, is that Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River. Here's why this makes sense. The area where his car was found is near the river. The terrain out there is rural and dark. I mean genuinely dark, the way only farmland in the middle of nowhere can be dark at midnight. If you've never been to rural Minnesota, you might not fully appreciate how disorienting that kind of darkness can be. No streetlights, no city glow on the horizon, just fields and sky, and the occasional farmhouse light in the distance. If Brandon was walking, disoriented in the dark, trying to navigate toward what he thought were lights from a town, it is entirely plausible that he could have walked toward the river without realizing it. The Yellow Medicine River has steep banks in some areas. If he fell in, especially at night,
especially if he was disoriented or intoxicated even mildly. He could have been swept away before anyone could help him. The river was searched multiple times by dive teams and recovery specialists. But rivers are complex. They move, they shift, they hide things. It's not unheard of for a body to travel significant distances downstream before being recovered, or in some cases, never being recovered at all. And that's the part that haunts this case. The Yellow Medicine River was searched, but it was not fully searched for many miles downstream. Some stretches were simply inaccessible. Some areas were not searched until it was much later, when conditions had changed. To this day, Brandon's body has never been found in the river, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Then there's the second theory, and this one is darker. Some people believe that Brandon didn't fall into a river. Some people believe that something happened to him that night before he even started walking. That the "oh shit" moment wasn't about the terrain or the darkness. It was about a person. Think about it. He was a 19-year-old kid, alone on a gravel road in the middle of the night, miles from town. His car was already in a ditch. He was on the phone with his dad, and then suddenly, without warning, something startled him enough to say those two words, and then nothing. What if someone drove by? What if someone stopped? There is no evidence of foul play, none. No signs of struggle at the car, no witnesses who came forward, no suspicious activity reported in the area. But the absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. And the sheer completeness of Brandon's disappearance, the fact that not a single trace was ever found, has led to some investigators and true crime researchers to wonder if someone made sure there would be no traces. The third theory, and this one his family doesn't believe, but that some researchers have floated, is that Brandon was simply more intoxicated than anyone realized, and that he wandered far off course and succumbed to exposure. Minnesota in May can still be cold at night. Temperatures in that region in mid-May can drop significantly. A disoriented young man, in the dark, in the cold, walking in the wrong direction, could have collapsed in a field, in a drainage ditch, somewhere not immediately visible from the road. But searches covered enormous areas, and even decomposition over time tends to leave something: bones, clothing, something. Brandon left nothing.
Let's go back to that phone call one more time, because I've been thinking about it, and I think it holds the key to everything, if we could just understand it. Brandon was on the phone with his dad for over an hour. An hour. That means his dad was hearing everything in real time. What was Brian hearing during that call? Brandon described walking. He described seeing lights. He sounded like a young man who was frustrated but okay, someone who expected to be home within the hour. He was navigating by what he could see, which wasn't much. At some point during that walk, he crossed over from wherever he was into whatever happened to him. And then 2 words, and silence. One of the most chilling aspects of this case that investigators noted is that even though Brian and Annette drove around the Lind area for over an hour while on the phone with Brandon, they never saw him. Which means Brandon was not near Lind at all. He was somewhere else, somewhere 25 miles away, walking through the dark toward lights he could see, describing a landscape that his parents, driving through Lind, could not reconcile with what they were seeing. Was he hallucinating? Was he genuinely that disoriented? Or was he simply so turned around in the darkness that he had completely lost his sense of direction? In 2012, 4 years after Brandon disappeared, the Yellow Medicine River gave up something. Searchers found a shoe near the river, a shoe that was consistent with the type Brandon was known to wear.
The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and reignited the search. Dive teams went back into the water. The riverbanks were combed again. But that was it. Just the one shoe. And even that couldn't be definitively confirmed as Brandon's. One shoe in 4 years. That's all. His case remains officially open. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office has never closed it. Investigators have continued to follow up on tips over the years. His parents have never stopped pushing for answers. In 2019, more than a decade after he vanished, searchers went back to the Yellow Medicine River with updated technology. Side-scan sonar, underwater drones, methods that didn't exist or weren't widely available in 2008. They searched sections of the river that hadn't been thoroughly covered in the original investigation. They found nothing. And yet, the search continues, because the alternative, accepting that a 19-year-old kid simply walked into the dark one night and ceased to exist without explanation, is something that no parent, no community, no decent human being can just accept and move on from. I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in true crime content, and that is what cases like Brandon's do to a community. Marshall, Minnesota is a small city of about 13,000 people. Lind is even smaller. In communities like these, everyone is connected. Brandon wasn't just a face on a missing poster. He was somebody's classmate, somebody's neighbor, somebody's kid who went to the same school as your kid, who you saw at the gas station, who you waved to from your porch. When someone like Brandon disappears and is never found, it leaves a wound in a community that doesn't fully heal, because there's no funeral, there's no grave, there's no moment of collective grief and collective closure. There's just absence and a question mark that hangs over everything forever. His parents have spoken about this, about how they've had to learn to live in a permanent state of not knowing. How do you mourn someone when you don't know for certain that they're gone? How do you move forward when every knock on the door might be the detective coming to tell you they found something? They made a choice. They made Brandon's disappearance mean something. Brandon's Law, advocacy for missing persons, keeping his case in the public eye, making sure that the name Brandon Swanson is not forgotten. And it hasn't been forgotten. 15 years later, people are still talking about it. Cases like this one keep getting revisited because the truth matters. Because a 19-year-old kid with his whole life ahead of him deserves better than just disappearing. Now I want to address something directly to you, the person watching this right now. If you're from southwestern Minnesota, or if you have any connection to that area, if you were in Lind or Taunton or anywhere along the Yellow Medicine River on the night of May 14, 2008, if you saw anything, heard anything, know anything at all, please reach out to the Lyon County Sheriff's Office. The case is still open. There is no statute of limitations on doing the right thing.
And if you know someone who knew Brandon, share this video with them. Because sometimes the detail that breaks a case open has been sitting in someone's memory for years, and they just haven't realized it was important. Tips can be submitted to the Lyon County Sheriff's Office directly. Brandon's family has also maintained a presence online for years, trying to keep the case in the public consciousness. Let's talk about what we know for certain as we bring this together. We know that Brandon Swanson was 19 years old on May 14, 2008. We know his car ended up in a ditch near Taunton, Minnesota. We know he called his parents and was on the phone with his father for over an hour. We know he described walking toward lights, believing he was near Lind. We know his last words were, "Oh shit." We know he was never found.
We know that in the 15-plus years since his disappearance, not a single confirmed piece of physical evidence has been recovered. We know that his family fought and won a change in Minnesota law that has helped other missing persons cases. And we know that somewhere in that landscape of flat fields and dark river and gravel roads, there is an answer. There has to be. Because people don't just disappear. They go somewhere. Something happens to them. And the universe keeps its secrets quietly, but it keeps them. Somewhere out there in the soil of southwestern Minnesota, or at the bottom of the Yellow Medicine River, or in the memory of someone who has been carrying something heavy for 16 years, is the truth about what happened to Brandon Swanson. His parents are still waiting. His community is still waiting. And somewhere, in a way that transcends logic, Brandon is still waiting too. If this case moves you, if you think Brandon's story deserves more attention, share it, talk about it, keep the name alive. Because every time someone says the name Brandon Swanson out loud, somewhere in Minnesota, a family feels a little less alone in their waiting. Brandon Swanson, 19 years old, Marshall, Minnesota, missing since May 14th, 2008. He deserves to be found.